I haven't met many people who don't want to be happy. Maybe a kid or two who prefers to sulk and kick up a temper tantrum, but even they are doing that because they're in pursuit of being happy. Today and for the remaining Sundays in September, I wish to focus our thoughts on the theme of joy and happiness. One reason people love the Psalms so much is that they frequently speak words of blessing, encouragement, assurance, and prayers of petition for God to arise, to save, to deliver, and to protect them. This first psalm, and consequently the whole book of Psalms, begins with the word blessed, which when you boil it down really means happy. It also means a joyful mental state of contentment and a condition of comfort and security. So this psalm opens with a word of joy and happiness. As well, you'll notice that a person's happiness, according to this psalm, is related to their choices, their decisions, and their selected path of life. This psalm isn't concerned with the happiness that comes from having a lot of money, a lot of resources, though those are sources of happiness. It isn't concerned with happiness that comes from good health or the health and the life of your relatives and friends being around you and you are not having to be bereaved or grieving over their passing, though having relatives and friends alive and well is a source of happiness. This psalm doesn't talk about being around happy people, though we know that people with scornful and mocking attitudes that the psalm attributes to the bad company we should avoid, are likely to be miserable and cantankerous folks that we would avoid, not join or follow. The happiness with which this psalm is concerned is the kind that comes from good choices and decisions. One kind of choices and decisions will leave you happy, and another kind of choices and decisions shall not do that at all. So I make two cases and then I'll be done. First, there is a slippery slope a person can choose. It is ruinous and it will bring you hell. There is a slippery slope a person can choose. It is ruinous and it will bring you hell. Let me tell you about that slope. It's downward. And the psalmist in verse 1 describes those who choose it as wicked. That word yields others such as sinful, godless, lawless, vicious, iniquitous, guilty, and evil. All of those words are caught up in the one Hebrew word that we have in Psalm 1 translated wicked. Now, there's nothing lofty about this slope. It's going downward. Some choose it expecting happiness, but it does not bring them that. That's the slope. Now let me tell you about the slip. The verse says, happy are those who do not take the path that sinners tread. The most basic form of sin is to miss the mark. It's like an archer who pulls back the bow and aims at the bullseye and lets it fly, but hits something else. She has sinned. She honestly intended to hit the bullseye. It's a big competition. It's the last. She wants to hit the bullseye and misses. Doesn't intend to miss, but misses. But she has sinned. That's the fundamental meaning of the word sin. And that's why we call it a slip. A few weeks ago, I preached to you from Hebrews chapter 12. And the writer there says, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles you. The sin. Nobody, well, some people do, but most people don't wake up one morning intending to go sin. But we fall into it. A sinner doesn't have to intentionally do wrong, but rather can be one who has strayed into doing wrong. They are just as guilty and accountable as one who did it with intent. That is why we say that the slope is slippery. Those who follow sinful people, thinking that they will stay honest and honorable, are, pardon me, foolish. Please don't take it personally, but many good people, even church people, some I have known and loved, chose to embrace the sin, the mocking, and even the evil of a man manifestly, severely, and undeniably, morally, legally, and spiritually defective, even before he became a twice impeached president. And I'm very sad at what they have become as they slide down this slippery slope, causing the church to lose its credibility along the way and threatening our national democracy and security. And we are not happy. This slope is not only slippery, it is serious. Because a sinner is not only one who misses the way, as in a slip, but a sinner is one who endangers others. On the slippery slope, if you should walk there, are unprincipled folks who shall endanger you and expose you to hell. So I told you about the slope, and then I told you about the slip. Now let me tell you about the sequence in this slippery slope for those who choose it. First, they slipped into a path of wrong and began walking alongside sin practitioners. Blessed is the man or the one who does not walk. Now, once you're physically able, you walk. I mean, one of the biggest joys of a new parent is to watch their child learn to walk and take their first step. It's natural to walk. And Jesus didn't tell us in what we call the Great Commission, go into all the world. He said, as you are going into the world, Jesus knew we would be walking into the world. Walking comes naturally. And that's why walking naturally allows us to slip easily into sin. That's the idea. The sequence is that we're walking, going about our own business, and we come across somebody with slick-sounding words, with something to sell that looks too good to be true, and we buy it. And we end up walking in the counsel of the ungodly, as the psalmist says. Second, they stood, establishing themselves in the sinful practices of their new company. Third, they sat down. So see the sequence. You're going about your own business. You're walking. Somebody comes by and entices you into something. It sounds good. Great, let me come see it. Before you know it, you stand to take it in. And next thing you know, you're seated in their council, seated in their planning sessions, seated drinking down their ideology, drinking down all of what they feed you. That's the idea that the psalmist wants to get through to us. We don't wake up one morning and decide we're going to be sinful. We can be caught easily into it. So we need to watch it. That's the sequence. There's one more thing about the slippery slope. It's the sentence. The sentence for those who choose the slippery slope. So we have to jump to verses 4 and 5 for that. First, the wicked, for that is what we are or shall become if we chose that slippery slope. The wicked shall experience insignificance. They shall become like chaff, the verse says. That stuff that remains in your fireplace after you've burned the wood and warmed yourselves around it. Those remains are useless unless you are going to put it in your kitchen garden, and you better be careful about how much of it you put in the first place. We'll kill it off. But generally, that's useless. We throw it out. Friends, my overall understanding of my overall responsibility as a pastor, even as an interim pastor, and some called me a temporary pastor when they got annoyed with me. My understanding of my primary overall responsibility as a pastor is to see to it that the church and no member within it ever becomes insignificant. I will defend anyone who tries to make someone else seem insignificant. And we must all seek to prevent ourselves and others and the church from becoming insignificant, because we fail to be good Christians. And I warn you about this, especially because of this current American climate where so many Christians seem to lack the capacity to discern good from evil and lies from truth. And the failure to do that lands us in the counsel of the ungodly, the wicked, justifying the wicked because the ends might sound good. We must watch out for this insignificance. Secondly, the wicked shall experience not only insignificance, but they shall experience instability. They are the chaff, which is so light. It has no weight, and it has no grounding, and it blows away. They'll be blown away, such people, because they possess neither the weight nor the grounding. They're the kind of people who flit from lie to lie, from gimmick to gimmick, from Messiah to fake Messiah, from new thing to next fake new thing, hoping to find happiness, but they never do. Some flit from church to church. And unfortunately, my kind of preaching has caused some to flip from it to some other church, and they take their bad attitudes there as well, instead of looking within to hear what God has said through the annoying pastor. Well, they make everybody else miserable along the way. Now, insignificance is bad. Instability is worse. But you haven't heard the worst of it all. The worst part of the sentence for those who choose the slippery path, the slippery slope, is inadmissibility. There's insignificance, there's instability, but there is also inadmissibility. In the Hebrew mind and in the Judeo-Christian tradition is the idea of a judgment at the end of all time. When, as Jesus once said in a parable, God shall separate the sheep from the goats, the righteous from the unrighteous. It is enough to say this, that at some point in time, somehow, whether in this life or another, or both, humans are going to have to account for their choices in life. And those who have chosen the path of wickedness shall fail to pass muster in that judgment. They'll find themselves among an unsavory crowd outside of the assembly of the righteous, surrounded by immense, intolerable, extended, and perhaps unfixable unhappiness and ruin. I don't know what hell will be like. I don't really buy much into Dante's picture of it, but what I do know and understand from everything the scriptures warn us about is that those who are headed for hell had better be prepared for a time of intense, immense unhappiness because they took a slippery slope. Friends, there's a slippery slope a person can choose. It is ruinous and it will bring you hell. But there's an alternative. There is a higher road a person can take. It is rewarding, and it will bring you happiness. There is a higher road a person can take. It is rewarding, and it will bring you happiness. A couple of things about this road. It is a road to be preferred, and which is principled. It's a preferred and principled road. And the second thing about it is that it is a road that involves practice and persistence. So first, it's a road to be preferred. The psalmist says that those who choose this road do it because they delight in God's law. They prefer God's law. And without getting into the weeds, let's just say that God's law is never imposed on anybody else, not even by God, God's self. It's always a choice. God never imposes, and those people who say they speak for God or love their nation never impose God's will upon anybody else. If you get angry with what I preach, don't leave. Just shake it off and say that guy maybe drank something funny this morning. Don't leave. Those who say they speak for God never make life miserable for anybody else. You can take it or leave it. God's law pursues justice and peace for everyone through what is right, not through what will win. Do you hear that? God's will, God's law that the righteous meditate upon day and night, whatever else it is, it pursues justice, peace, and righteousness for all, and what is right, not what will win. And at this 11 o'clock hour, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever hour it is elsewhere in America, there are a lot of people sitting in pews like this whose pastors need to read the riot act to them because they lead the nation in unrighteousness and injustice because they're seeking what wins rather than what is right. That's why this road is also a principled road, in that it seeks God's law, God's will, not the unprincipled and unethical winds that the power-hungry liars seek, who would destroy others and even destroy an entire democracy and the world if we say that we are the leaders of the free world. For just watch to see what other nations are going to start talking about elections stolen. The whole world is going to fall into the abyss because of what we have done in this country. It's a road that involves practice. The one who chooses this path meditates on God's law. Meditation is not just a quick prayer and a quick thought and boom, you're out of here. No, meditation takes time. It involves developing practices, whether you walk through a maze or some kind of practice. That's why we say that meditation requires persistence as well. It involves developing practices that help you to follow through indeed that upon which you think and ponder and meditate. Now watch for the rewarding and the happy part. Two things shall define the people who choose this higher road. Verse 3 says, those folks shall be productive. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. That's a lovely verse. And people hang on to it as they should. They aren't only productive, such people who choose the higher road, but they're also protected. Verse 6 declares that the Lord shall watch over their way. Those are code words to say that God will take a special interest in such people, taking care of them and being present with them even when they don't know that God is with them or think that God has abandoned them. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The human part of him was crying out, but God was there with him and raised him up on the third day. I know that sometimes the wicked prosper. One of the prophets said, "Oh God, why do the ways of the wicked prosper?" I mean, I've asked that question many times. And you too, you have to, so don't look at me as though you don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the wicked prosper and sometimes the righteous suffer. It's true. I know that the way of wickedness may seem attractive to some who are righteous. This is precisely why the psalmist warns good people, instead of wasting these words on those who are already sold out to evil. Good people, including church folk, you and me, we all remain susceptible to evil because of how easy it is to slide there, because of how attractive it seems, and how successful it is in the short run. In the short run. That's the warning. Let me invoke some names so that I make this point. Names such as Bernie Madoff, Ken Lay, Whitey Bulger, Al Capone, Aaron Hernandez, Jeffrey Epstein, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, Elizabeth Holmes, Ghislaine Maxwell, Leona Helmsley, Richard Nixon, Spiro Agnew. Remember those names, at least some of them? All of these people thought that they were living it up. And they looked as though they were moving on up. And they did for a while. But eventually their sins and their crimes found them out. And in the case of most, snuffed out their lives. In the case of all, snuffed out their lives. Some by death, some by imprisonment, some by disgrace, or some by all three. That shoe is going to drop for all who play footloose with the law, with justice, with righteousness, and think that wickedness pays no matter how long their run of dubious success. So for people who choose the high road, even if some sorrow comes your way, weeping will last only for the night, but joy comes in the morning, and your joy and happiness shall last and shall sustain you through many more difficult times ahead. For you see, happiness is tied to what happens. You can't unhappen those bad things that robbed you of your happiness. But joy prevails through all kinds of miserable scenarios and situations. Joy supersedes and transcends circumstances. And that is what, even though the first word translates into happy, that is what the psalmist is trying to communicate to us. So my friends, don't walk with the wicked. Don't stand with the sinner. Don't sit with the mocker. That never makes sense. Never in the long run, and often in the short run. Instead, I recommend to you to delight and indulge in God's bright idea, God's bright ministry and desire and processes of justice, righteousness, and peace for all. There's a slippery slope before you. There's a higher road before you. One of these two will bring you joy and happiness. The other will bring you hell. Choose wisely. Amen.